You already believe in Tawhid. You already say God is one. So the question is not whether you believe it. The real question is, have you understood it correctly? Because Tawhid is not lost when it is denied. It is lost when it is misunderstood. And the most dangerous part is that misunderstanding does not feel like error. It feels like belief. You say God is one, but if what you mean by that is not what the Qur'an intends, then everything built on it is already unstable. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to Reflection, where we explore the deeper wisdom of the Qur'an. In the previous episode, we began to uncover Tawhid, not as a number, but as absolute reality, a unity beyond comparison, beyond division, beyond imagination. But now we go further, because the Qur'an gives us the truth, but who teaches us how to understand it correctly? This is where we turn to Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wassalamu alayhi. Because in Nahj al-Balagha, he does something precise. He shows you that even when you say God is one, you may still be wrong. In this episode of Reflection, we will explore the four meanings of God is one according to Imam Ali alayhi salam. The two understandings that are false, the two meanings that are true, and how misunderstanding Tawheed quietly leads to error. We say it constantly, God is one. It is the foundation of belief, the center of the Qur'an, the core of faith. But pause for a moment. When you say it, what do you actually mean? Because not every understanding of one is true, and not every affirmation of Tawheed is correct. This is where Imam Ali does something remarkable. He does not begin with explanation. He begins with a question. In Nahj al-Balagha, Imam Ali says, إن قول القائل واحد على أربعة أقسام فوجهان منها لا يجوزان على الله سبحانه ووجهان يثبتان فيه. The statement, He is one, has four meanings. Two of them are not permissible regarding Allah, glory be to Him, and two meanings are affirmed for Him. This is not a small clarification. It's a warning because it tells you something unsettling. You can say God is one and still misunderstand Him. You can affirm Tawheed and still reduce it. And the danger is you may never realize it. Because the error is not in the words. It is in what those words mean to you. This is why Tawheed is not just a statement. It is a disciplined understanding. One that must be protected from assumptions you didn't even know you are making. Because most of those assumptions come from the only world you know. A world you can measure and compare. And without realizing it, you begin to project that world onto God. This is where Tawheed begins to break. Not in denial, but in projection. Which is why Imam Ali alayhi salam does not begin by explaining what is correct. He begins by removing what is wrong. Because as long as those assumptions remain, clarity never emerges. Pause for a moment. When you say God is one, are you describing Him, or are you unknowingly projecting something onto Him? Imam Ali alayhi salam begins by removing what is false, because Tawheed is not only about affirming truth, it is about eliminating error at its root. The first misunderstanding is to think of God as numerically one as opposed to two, one as opposed to many. Something that can be counted. At first, it feels correct. But look closer. Anything that can be counted exists within a system. And that means it is limited. Because number only exists where there is plurality. So when you say one in this sense, you're not affirming Tawheed. You are placing God inside the very structure of creation, reducing Him to something that exists among other things. This is not unity. It is limitation. The second misunderstanding is more subtle. It is to think of God as one in the sense of a category, not counted, but classified. The moment something is placed within a category, it implies others like it, a shared nature, a resemblance. And that quietly destroys Tawhid because God is no longer unique. He becomes one instance within a broader reality. This is why the Qur'an cuts through all of this as anchored Surah Al-Shura, that is Surah number 42, verse number 11. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There is nothing like him, and he is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. Not one among others, not one of a kind, nothing like him at all. These two errors come from the same place. You understand everything in your world through counting, classifying, and comparing. So you take those same tools and apply them to God. But Tawheed demands something else. It demands that you let go of the very framework you use to understand everything. Because as long as God is being understood through the logic of creation, He's not being understood at all. Consider this. When you think of God as one, are you counting Him or placing Him in a category your mind can understand? Once the incorrect meanings are removed, Imam Ali alayhi salam shows what remains. The first correct meaning of Tawheed is that God has no likeness. He is one, not because He is counted, and not because He belongs to a category, but because nothing resembles Him in any way. This is not just a statement about God. It's a statement about the limits of your knowledge. Because everything you understand through comparison. You relate it to something you already know. You move from what is familiar to what is unfamiliar. But Tawheed removes that completely. Because if nothing is like Him, then there's nothing you can compare Him to. Nothing you can relate Him to. Nothing you can use to bridge the gap. And that means you cannot understand Him the way you understand anything else. And this is why the Qur'an anchors in Surah Safat, Surah number 37, verse 159, where Allah says, Subhanallah amma yasifun. Glory be to Allah above what they describe. Because even description can become a form of limitation. This is where Tawheed becomes difficult, because it forces you to accept something uncomfortable, that your mind is not equipped to grasp God directly. Not because He's absent, but because He is beyond the structures you use to understand anything. This is why Imam Ali alayhi salam removes every form of resemblance, not to make God distant, but to protect His reality from being reduced to something familiar. Because the moment you make Him familiar, you have already made Him something else. So Tawheed requires restraint, not just in what you say, but in what you allow your mind to form. Because sometimes the greatest error is not denial, it is imagining. Sit with this. If nothing is like Him, then what are you picturing when you think of God? The second correct meaning of Tawheed is that God is not composed, not made of parts, not built from elements, not structured in any way. At first, this may sound abstract, but stay with it, because everything you know is made of parts. And that means everything you know is dependent. It depends on its parts. It depends on what brings those parts together, and it depends on what sustains them. Remove the parts, and the thing no longer exists. But Tawheed demands something different, a reality that does not depend, a reality that is not assembled, not structured, not held together. Because if something is composed, then something else must have brought it together. And that means it is not ultimate. This is why the Qur'an describes God in a way that removes all need, as anchored in Surah Al-Ikhlas, where Allah says, Allahu Samad. Allah is Al-Samad, the one upon whom all depend, while He depends on nothing. This is the dividing line between creation and God. Everything in creation is contingent. It exists through something else, relies on something else, is sustained by something else. But God is not. This is why Imam Ali alayhi salam is so precise, because if God had parts, He would require something to bring those parts together. And the moment you say that, you have already made him dependent. And once dependence enters, Tawhid is no longer intact. Because the one who depends cannot be the one upon whom everything depends. This is also why God's attributes are not separate from him. They are not additions. They are not components. They are identical to his essence. Because the moment you divide him, you have already lost his unity. Pause for a moment. Everything you know exists through parts. So what does it mean to believe in a reality that is not made of anything at all? Up to this point, Imam Ali alayhi salam has shown you what Tawheed is and what it is not. But now he shows you something deeper. What happens when it is misunderstood? In Nahj al-Balagha, he lays out a sequence, not as abstract theology, but as a structure of reality itself. He says, Kamaluddini ma'rifatuhu. The perfection of religion is to know him. Wa kamalu ma'rifatihi at-tasdiqu bihi. The perfection of knowing him is to affirm him. Wa kamalu at-tasdiqi bihi tawhiduhu. The perfection of affirming him is to declare his oneness. Wa kamalu tawhidihi al-ikhlasu lahu. The perfection of his oneness is sincerity to him. وَكَمَالُ الْإِخْلَاصِ لَهُ نَفْيُ الصِّفَاتِ عَنْهُ. And the perfection of sincerity is to negate attributes from him. This is not just progression, it's purification. From knowing to affirming, to unifying to sincerity, to stripping away every false layer. And then Imam Ali, he warns, because once this is broken, it does not collapse all at once. It unravels step by step. He says, فَمَنْ وَصَفَ اللَّهَ سُبْحَانَهُ فَقَدْ قَرَنَهُ. Whoever describes him has spared him. وَمَنْ قَرَنَهُ فَقَدْ ثَنَّاهُ. Whoever pairs him has made him two. وَمَنْ ثَنَّاهُ فَقَدْ جَزَّأَهُ. Whoever makes him two has divided him. وَمَنْ جَهْلَهُ فَقَدْ أَشَارَ إِلَيْهِ. Whoever misunderstands him points to him. وَمَنْ أَشَارَ إِلَيْهِ فَقَدْ هَدَّهُ. Whoever points to him limits him. وَمَنْ حَدَّهُ فَقَدْ عَدَّهُ. And whoever limits him has counted him. Look at how precise this is. It begins with something that feels harmless. Description. You describe God as you describe everything else. And in that moment, you have already introduced comparison. From there, the collapse is inevitable. Comparison leads to pairing. Pairing leads to duality. Duality leads to division. Division leads to ignorance. Ignorance leads to limitation. And limitation leads to counting. And counting ultimately returns you to the very error you thought you had avoided. This is why Imam Ali is so precise. Because Tawheed is not lost in a single statement. It is lost through a chain. And that chain begins the moment God is treated like anything else. Consider this. If even describing God incorrectly begins this collapse, then how careful must you be in how you understand him? After all this precision, after removing comparison, after removing division, after removing every assumption, the Qur'an leaves you with something deeper. Not a definition, but a reality that cannot be contained. Because God is not only beyond, He's also near. Closer than anything you can point to. Closer than your thoughts, closer than your breath, closer than your own self. This is why the Qur'an anchors this in Surah Al-Qaf. That is Surah number 50, verse 16. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. We are closer to Him than His jugular vein. And yet, beyond everything you can imagine, this is the tension of Tawheed. Not a contradiction, but a perfection you cannot reduce. Because if He were only near, He would be confined within your experience. And if He were only beyond, He would be distant from your reality. But Tawheed demands both absolute transcendence and complete presence. This is what Imam Ali alayhi salam points to. A God who is not contained, yet never absent. Not grasped, yet never distant. And this is where understanding changes. Because the more you try to define Him, the more you realize He cannot be contained by any definition. And the more you become aware of Him, the more you recognize how little can actually be grasped. This is where Tawhid reaches its depth, not in describing God, but in knowing that He cannot be described. Pause for a moment. If God is closer to you than anything you know, yet beyond everything you can imagine, then what does it mean to truly know Him? In the last episode, and in this one, we've been speaking about Tawhid, not just as something you say, but as something you must understand. In the last episode, we uncovered what it means for God to be one. And in this episode, we saw something more difficult, that even when you say God is one, you may still misunderstand Him. So what remains after everything we've said? Well, first, Tawhid is not a word. It's a discipline of understanding. Saying God is one is not enough. What matters is what you mean when you say it. Second, the greatest mistake is not denial, it is reduction. The moment you imagine God like anything else, you have already limited Him. Third, God is not understood through the logic of creation. Is not counted, not categorized, not composed, and anything understood through those frameworks is not Him. And fourth, the more you know Him, the more you recognize what cannot be known. Tawhid does not end in definition. It ends in humility, because what is absolute cannot be contained. Finally, Tawhid is not something you repeat. It is something you protect. Because the moment you describe God like anything else, you have already reduced Him. And the moment you reduce Him, you have already lost what makes Him God. But this leaves you with a deeper question. If God is beyond comparison, beyond division, beyond everything you can imagine, then what about you? Because everything you know about yourself comes from a world of parts, change, and limitation. So who are you really? Are you just this body? Or is there something deeper, something that remains, even as everything else changes? In the next episode, we turn to the Qur'an's understanding of the self. Because before you can understand your relationship with God, you must understand what you truly are. If you found this reflection meaningful, take a moment to subscribe and share it with someone who may need to hear it. Because these are not just ideas to listen to, they are truth to return to. Until next week, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.